I'm Jenny Fern, and welcome to my library. I'm a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. So let's talk about books. Last night, I saw a video by Katie Marie, and it was Undiscovered Gems, books that have less than 10,000 ratings on Goodreads. I have a very similar video for you today because I thought that was such a fun idea. So thank you so much, Katie Marie. I'm stealing your video. If you can hear rustling sounds, that is the kitten Al, Big Al, scurrying around. Hi, baby. You want to come over here? Starved for attention for some reason, constantly. So all of the books that I have today have less than 5,000 reviews on Goodreads, which is the marker that I'm using. I thought it was a fairly decent and easy to see marker. I read some really obscure shit. Let's do 5,000. And I was a little surprised at what books are on here with incredibly low numbers of ratings. I also have them in order from most ratings to least ratings, and I have 12 books to share today. They are all books that I've read within the last 3 years. The first book that I have had 4,282 ratings, and that is The Geography of Nowhere by James Howard Kunstler. This is an excellent book. I read this for my 1993 reading vlog, so it's a little bit on the older side. But everything in here is so relevant. If you have any interest in your surroundings of your town, the automobile industry, on the structure of American towns, if you're interested in the context and the history, a very opinionated man talking about how our communities can be structured and how they are currently structured, I think you would enjoy this. I found it such a wonderful read. The next book that I have had 3,606 ratings and is by a very well-known author, and that is John Barleycorn by Jack London. This is Jack London's memoirs. It really is all about his alcoholism. This was the book that got me actually interested in Jack London as a person. His life, although quite short, was packed full of adventure. He was a very explored, experienced man. His life is strewn with access to alcohol and alcohol culture. He's writing this book in part to help with the temperance movement and with prohibition, which is just such an interesting historical perspective. And I am surprised that not that many people have rated this on Goodreads, because to me, this is such a well-known author. This memoir is so interesting. His life is so interesting. The next book I have had 2,675 ratings, and that is The Great Good Thing by Roderick Townley. This is a middle grade novel. This book has so much more depth to it than I was expecting. We start in kind of a fairy tale land. You're in a book. We're characters in a book. Al just had his whole mouth fully around my earbuds case. He's in peak gremlin kitten mode. Hi, little guy. At the surface and at the beginning, a middle grade book about living in a book and characters who are in a book being read. It becomes this very meta experience where these characters live in this book, but then they live in the memory of the person who read the book. And so it becomes a book about memory and legacy and death. And it is just such a experience. I really recommend this. So I'm not surprised this has so few ratings because it came out in 2001 and it was a middle grade book. So if people were reading this book and it was a lot of people, they would have been children. It would have been far before Goodreads. I'm here to put this back out into the world. I recommend this. The next books I'm going to put together because they're by the same author and they're about very similar things. That is Silent Earth with 1,513 ratings, and The Garden Jungle with 1,497 ratings. So I first heard about this book because of Allison Pages, I think, was reading this. I thought it sounded excellent because I love reading about insects. I will say this is a bit tough to get through because I don't think the threat to our insect populations and diversity of life can be overstated. It says averting the insect apocalypse. We are living currently in an insect apocalypse. There are very many things currently in action that are exceedingly detrimental to the health of many, many species. If you're interested in biodiversity or hold the presence of life on this planet with any regard, I would really recommend considering insects as a critical part of this planet and considering the life of insects in the everyday choices that you make. Paired with that is The Garden Jungle, which does go through various insects because Dave Goulson is an insect guy. If you're interested in permaculture, these books are also excellent, but this book particularly has a big permaculture slant to it. I will say that this book is a little bit more uplifting because it talks about the things that you can do in your garden, and it goes into details about the insects that you yourself can observe in your garden, which I just loved hearing about. And it also goes into other aspects of gardening, like other wildlife and obviously the plants that are in gardens. The next book that I have is a graphic novel, and I don't even know how I came across this. I hadn't heard anybody talk about this. Odessa by Jonathan Hill. This is about a teenage girl and her little brothers going on a post-apocalyptic adventure trying to find their mom. I just really enjoyed it so much. Here's a random spread, and I will say it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. I think there's supposed to be a part 2, but I haven't seen it. Just be warned. And that had 1,244 ratings. The next book I don't own. I tried to buy it, and the copy that I had purchased, I got like a notification that like it wasn't available or something like that. It is available for free because this has just entered the public domain this year in the United States. That is Strange Interlude by Eugene O'Neill. Strange Interlude is a very long play, and it explores inner monologues. It is about this woman named Nina, her life, and the men who are orbiting around her at various points in her life. I was so interested in the way that these different characters thought, especially Nina. I found her inner monologue so compelling. So if you're interested in reading some 1920s experimental theater, I would recommend Strange Interlude. It is just fantastic. And that has 510 ratings. I'm thinking that these books that have just entered the public domain now will get a little bit more readership in this year and the coming years because they'll be readily available to a huge population for free. The next book that I have, I read at the beginning of this year. It has 399 ratings on Goodreads. Just fell so hard in love with this book. It is The Gift of the Deer by Helen Hoover. This is a nature memoir about a woman living with her husband in a remote cabin in winter, and their interactions with the local deer population. Honestly, it is heartbreaking. This is a heartbreaking book, but it is so wonderful to hear about nature in this way. I adored this book. The next book that I have is Dark Princess, which is a book that I've read kind of recently. This has 306 ratings. This is by W.E.B. Du Bois. I think that this book was just so good for me particularly. It has some of the aspects or tropes to a book that I really love. I so enjoy a old-timey, like, conspiratorial league. It is really about race in America and also in the world. I loved the international aspect of this, but it is also a romance between our main character and the Dark Princess. The reviews on Goodreads for this book are mixed, I would say, but I really recommend this. I think it is such a unique reading experience. I was shocked to see this book had so few ratings. 170 ratings, and that is The Eternal Darkness by Bob Ballard. Part of the reason I'm shocked that this has so few ratings is I first heard about this on The Adventure Zone. There was an episode of the Adventure Zone, and it's kind of like behind the scenes about how that D&D podcast is produced. There was a question about the research for the Ether Sea arc of the Adventure Zone. Griffin mentions that he read The Eternal Darkness by Bob Ballard. As it says, a personal history of deep sea exploration. This guy, Robert Ballard, was around for so many of the critically important deep sea exploration milestones and discoveries. He's a part of the Titanic discovery. He is a part of the geothermal vent discovery. He was there, and he has such an in-depth knowledge of the history before his time, and then he has, again, that extreme personal connection to the history during his time because he is such an important figure in deep sea exploration. If you are interested in learning about our oceans, I highly recommend this book. It is non-stop exciting. It does not get boring. It does not get dull. I loved this book. The next book that I have was written by a presidential candidate. This has 63 ratings, and that is Walls and Bars by Eugene V. Debs. Eugene V. Debs was, at least at the time, famously in prison when he was a candidate for president for the Socialist Party, and he was in prison for activities associated with striking, like labor movement stuff. This book was such a unique experience because I'd been reading books written by prisoners, and this was the oldest book that I was reading, the oldest account of the U.S. prison system that I was reading. I don't know if you can see all the dog earring that I did, but those are all lines that I thought were just so compelling. If you're interested in reading a 1920s account of a socialist presidential candidate who is actively imprisoned, this is your book. And the very last book I have has had 2 ratings. One of those is me. And this was my very favorite book of all of last year, The Ways of a Mud Dober by George D. Schaefer. You have seen that I have a certain passion for insects based on those Dave Goulson books, but this book I'd read before either of those. This is just so inspiring. This was published in 1949 by the Stanford University Press, and it's written by one of their professors who, kind of just for fun, like a little bit of citizen science, is studying mud dauber wasps around his office. So he's making these observations and he's conducting these experiments, a whole slew of experiments centered around this very specific wasp. If you have ever wanted to read nonfiction that is so specific that it would never be published, this is your jam. This book is very hard to find. It is very rare. It is not currently in print. If you have any way of accessing this book, if you think you'd be interested in reading a scientist's experiments about a specific type of wasp, and with the idea that this is fairly old science as well, from the 1940s, please try to find a copy. It is so well worth reading. And there's also these wonderful images. I learned, obviously, so much about Mud Dober wasps, but I also learned so much about how science has been conducted in the past and like the thought processes of a scientist trying to study about the local insect life. Oh, it's just inspiring. And I will say there are experiments in this that result in like the deaths of these wasps. This man, he has a pet wasp. He finds a wasp who has a wing that is malformed, and so she can't fly. He names her Crumplewing, and this book is dedicated to Crumplewing, and just the heart and soul in this book. Oh, can we get like a huge resurgence on the ways of the Mud Dauber? Because it is so good. Those are my undiscovered gems. Honestly, some of my favorite books. They all received 5 stars from me, except for John Barleycorn, which I gave a 4, and I don't really remember why, because since then, I think about this book constantly. They all come highly suggested by me. They can be quite niche, and they're not for everyone. If you think from what you heard, you would like it, give it a try. Not that many people have. At least not very many people in the present day since Goodreads has existed. Please let me know in the comments, what is a book that you cannot stop recommending that has little readership or that you think deserves more hype? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, consider sharing it with a friend who you think would also enjoy it. Consider liking and subscribing, and I will be back again soon. Oh, hello.